Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be changing the brakes on a 2007 Chevy Silverado. We have the truck properly supported on jack stands. I like to lift using the center cross member on the front of most of these trucks. We use a flathead screwdriver to remove the cover. Now we'll use a 22mm socket to remove the lug nuts. Remove the tire, the wheel. At this point, you can inspect the pad thickness by looking through these grooves. Only one pad is visible. You can further inspect by looking from the front. You can see the front pad still has a little life left in it, as does the back one. They are getting very close to their wear indicators, so we're going to go ahead and replace them. Next, to release the caliper, we're going to place this clamp over the rear of the caliper and into the brake pad. We're going to apply some force. Now, to prevent damage from the master cylinder, we're going to drain off the excess fluid through this bleeder. So place your drain pan underneath. Then you would need a 10mm wrench to loosen up the bleeder valve. Now that you see fluid is coming from it, we'll begin to tighten up on our clamp. You will also notice that this is a dual piston design. So there's 2 slots in here and 2 pistons in the back. Means that we will want to tighten this up evenly, both top and bottom, to not get it cockeyed, or cattywamp as my girlfriend's family would say. Alright, that's offering quite a bit of resistance now, so I will remove the clamps and tighten this bleeder up to not allow excess air to enter the system. So this is good. You can check the play of your pins by just moving the caliper back and forth at this point. These pins slide very easily, and that will allow for even pad wear on both sides of the rotor. Next, we'll take a 19mm socket and remove this bolt here and this bolt here, securing the caliper to the caliper bracket. Remove the 2 bolts holding the caliper on. For this next part, you'll need a piece of wire or maybe a bungee cord to secure the caliper up and out of the way and not do any damage to the hose. You don't want to let the caliper just hang by this hose because you could cause internal damage. Next, just simply pull the caliper up and off and secure it away with your wire, like such. Now we can remove the brake pads. These pads still have some wear, but you can see that there is cracking in the material. Not a great sign, but we're going to be replacing these with brand new ones. Now, it is important to inspect the rotor to make sure that there is no warping and no scarring. You should run your finger across the surface to make sure that it is smooth on both sides. Next, to make sure that it is not warped, simply rotate the rotor and look for excessive side-to-side play. This rotor looks pretty good. So we will leave it in place and replace the pads. If you do find that you need to replace the rotor, I will show you how to do that here. This rotor was actually in need of replacing. I was able to bring it to O'Reilly's and it had enough material left on it that they resurfaced it. However, I will show you how to remove it. On the back, you have 2 18mm bolts holding on the caliper bracket. I always suggest turning this. You just turn it by hand once the vehicle's up off the ground to get the most clearance behind here to work. So you'll take your 18mm socket, remove these 2 bolts. Now that those are removed, you can simply remove this bracket, straighten this out. Next you will need a T30 Torx bit. Looks like this guy. Remove this set screw. Then you can simply remove the rotor. Spec for damage. This one, even though the rotor has been turned, which means that they grind down the surfaces until they get a nice flat surface that's in spec, you can still see that it has a small gouge there and another small gouge here, just because the gouging was quite deep. So getting the rotor turned was $18 at O'Reilly's. Getting a new rotor was $72. Makes sense, right? So now you'll place your new or resurfaced rotor back on. See, there it is. And make sure to line it up with one of these holes here. It's a countersunk hole, so when the screw goes in, it sits flush on the surface. There we go. Now we're lined up. That holds the rotor on for you. Next, you'll put your bracket back on. Your two 18mm bolts. Here we go. Put Loctite on there. Same for the other one. There we go. Simply tighten these back up. Now at this point, a lot of times you'll actually get new brake hardware with your new brakes. I didn't, so I'm going to take this hardware off and clean it. Now we are ready to reinstall our clean brake hardware. Maybe I need to bend these prongs back a little bit. There we go, that's much better. I'll actually do the same for the top. You see they're sitting flushly in there. Now we need to remove and grease up our glide pins. Just pop out like such. You see that there appears to be a slight amount of rust on there as well. So we'll take these to the cleaning station too. Now we have cleaned both of these caliper pins. You can see what you want to check for is to make sure that it's nice and smooth along the entire bore. If it is, you're good to go. If it has scratches or a lot of rust buildup and pitting, you'll want to replace these. However, these are in good shape, so I'll be reusing them. At this point, you'll want to get some good quality brake and caliper grease and just slather it on. I like to go ahead and put it in, work it a few times, then take it back out, then slather it up a little bit more grease. That will lubricate the inside of the hole as well. Now, put it back in. There we go. See, the boot has nicely sealed around the bolt as well. This should go in and out nice and easy. Now we'll do the same thing for the other one. So now we're going to be using some brake cleaner to clean up the surface of the rotor and then put the pads on. What I like to do is to simply soak some paper towels with brake cleaner. And set that on the rotating surface. Rotate. Successfully clean the surface of the rotor. Do that one more time. Much better. I'll do the same for the back. Looking much better. Now that you've removed grease and oil from the surface of the rotor, we are ready for brake pads. Now you should always compare your old brake pads to your new brake pads. What you do is you just line them up, make sure that they have the same shape, the same width, the same height. As you can see, these match very well. And then you also have the rear pads, the same thing. Make sure they are the same in dimension. You can also see how much thicker the new pad material is from what was left of the old pad material. Now what damaged our rotor was this pad actually ran out of pad liner, so it ran out of brake pad material and was grinding on metal. That's why we had to have the rotor resurfaced. Now, I'm going to verify that we have the correct brake pads. I will start with the rear brake pad. I'm going to lubricate these two ears with more of the brake and caliper grease. Be very careful not to get this on the pad liner. We will start with the rear pad. Next, we will repeat the process with the front brake pad. Now both pads are in place, we can reinstall the caliper. You can see that both of these pistons are fully depressed. If they're not, I'll show you what to do. Use one of your brake pads, set in there. You'll finish compressing with a C-clamp. Now, simply place our caliper back on top over the brake pads. Need to push in these pins as well. Now we'll reinstall these bolts. Now you would take your 19mm socket and tighten these two bolts up. So as you can see, there's still a little bit of play in the caliper, and this is very good. You want this caliper to be able to float freely on here to apply even pressure to both brake pads. I'm very pleased with this. Alright, so at this point I'm going to open up the brake fluid reservoir and add some brake fluid. I've filled it to the max fill line, and I'm going to leave the cap off so that I can gravity bleed this caliper while I finish up on the other side. I'm going to loosen up this bleeder. Now you see it will just start dripping all on its own. And I'll take this 3/8 hose, this might be 1/4 inch, and I'll set it over the top. Alright, so I have attached our hose once again, and I have loosened the bleeder valve a little bit. Now I'm going to go and depress the brake pedal several times slowly to bleed out some fluid and bleed out any air bubbles will get trapped on the other side of this peak. I don't really have time to wait for this to gravity bleed on this side. As we can see, we have forced fluid to go through this line and into the pan. So now that this line is purged, you can see that there are no air bubbles remaining in this line. We can tighten up the bleeder. Just snug. We can drain the line. And we can remove our tubing. Make sure that this is good and snug. You don't want to over tighten this because these calipers are usually made out of aluminum, so they will strip out very easily. Now that we're done bleeding the brakes, we'll reinstall these protective bleeder covers and check the brake pedal for firmness. A little bit, and then it gets very firm. You may have to pump it up a few times, but usually by this point it is very hard. It's a good indication that there's very little or no air left trapped in the lines. We're ready to put the tires back on. Our lug nuts. Now we'll reinstall our hubcap. There we go. Now to complete your brake job, make sure that you refill the brake reservoir to the max level with the approved brake fluid. And then reinstall the cap. Well, now that you've topped off your brake fluid and reinstalled your tires, you can lower the truck and take it for a test drive and make sure everything is functioning properly. I have a few more projects to work on with this truck, so I'm not going to do that just yet, but I hope that this video was very useful to you, and I hope that you subscribe and check in for more videos. Thanks for watching.